this past week, the IDF has done a war crimes bonanza. Reports of them shooting people point blank at a school. And also, the IDF literally just an hour ago openly admitted that they shot 3 of their own hostages because they thought that they were Palestinian. There's also another hospital siege that they engaged in this week as well. They also assaulted a Turkish journalist, like a Anadolu Ajansı journalist, in broad daylight in front of cameras. They killed the Al Jazeera cameraman and they injured Wael Dahdu. The Wael is the Al Jazeera like veteran reporter that had his entire family slaughtered by the Israeli occupying force already. Like, there's a lot to talk about. There was another aspect of this that I wanted to cover as well. I'm going to show you this. I tweeted about this yesterday, but it bears repeating. Al Jazeera is reporting on the IDF storming another hospital. This one, Kamal Adwan. The IDF says it captured 70 Hamas fighters and collected weapons. Al Jazeera reports that the hospital turned over weapons used by hospital security. Every male over the age of 15 was detained. In the weeks ahead of the raid, the hospital was bombed and shelled by tanks and nearly 100 people killed. They were buried in a mass grave, Al Jazeera reports. 9 out of 40 hospitals in Gaza remain operational, and those barely so.
Hospital in the north.
This barely did a blip on Western media, by the way. Gaza healthcare workers taken by Israeli forces, says doctor amid horrendous conditions at hospital. Barely a blip in Western media. This is something that I brought up. I said it's wild how much time was spent on the Al Ahli hospital and how the IDF would never bomb a hospital only for them to siege Al Shifa immediately after with false claims that it was Hamas headquarters. And now it barely even makes a dent in Western media when they take another hospital because it's become the norm. That's precisely what's going on here. This happened this week.
Continuing its bombardment. Soldiers have just stormed the Kamal Adwan hospital in the north after laying siege to it for several days. These pictures are from last week, but they show the courtyard where Israeli forces are rounding up all the men in the hospital, including health workers. In southern Gaza, at least 20 Palestinians have been killed in a dawn attack on several homes in Rafah. The Israeli military is pressing on with its offensive and bombing civilian areas. More than 18,200 Palestinians have now been killed since the war began. Meanwhile, in the occupied West Bank, 4 Palestinians were killed in a drone strike during an Israeli raid on the city of Jenin. The Palestine Red Crescent says Israeli forces prevented ambulances from reaching the injured. All of this comes as the United Nations is warning of what it calls a breakdown of civil order in Gaza due to the limited delivery of desperately needed humanitarian aid. Israel announcing it will set up new checkpoints to increase the number of aid trucks entering Gaza, but critics say it will result in significant delays. The UN says at least 200 trucks are needed every day just to meet basic needs. Well, Hani Mahmoud is live in southern Gaza in Rafah for us. So, Hani, first of all, this raid on the Kamal Adwan hospital, what more are you hearing on that?
I want you to understand something. Israel is trying desperately to make it seem as though they're doing a great job with this occupation and this siege this time around. But when you're blowing up hospitals and simultaneously losing a shit ton of soldiers and even commanders, and the only thing you have to show for that is a bunch of people that you apprehended inside of a hospital that are like hospital security forces, for example, that you are falsely claiming are Hamas terrorists, and that's the only thing you have. You're like literally apprehending like nurses and doctors and shit in broad daylight, and then on top of that, killing your own hostages in the process too. At a certain point, people are going to recognize, no, this is too much of a toll. You guys are this shit up. There's a reason why in Afghanistan the American media deliberately stopped showing soldiers coming back in coffins when it becomes too costly. When an offensive operation, when an occupation becomes too costly, the population starts souring on the endless violence, no matter how racist they might be. The morale falls apart.
Yes, Hasan, there are more disturbing reports, confirmed reports of Israeli military storming Kamal Adwan Hospital. It's important to point out Kamal Adwan Hospital is a mid-sized hospital, the only remaining health facility in the northern part. And within the past few days, it came under heavy bombardment and airstrikes and tank shell, destroying the vast majority of its...
The thing that they keep doing is like giving weapons to like people that they have disrobed like this. I don't know. I can't confirm this. I have no reasonable way of confirming it other than just looking at the situation. And I don't understand why a nurse, a Gazan physician, is arrested and paraded around by the Israeli regime pretending he's a captured Hamas or PIJ fighter. I don't understand why these guys are disrobed, but they simultaneously have guns. They're stripping people naked, but then they also have their weapons on them. It feels to me, especially when it's like half the time, the people that they're doing this to are like, they have family members, they have people that can account for their existence, that see the situation and go, what the fuck are you talking about? That's a doctor. If you're stripping people of their clothes, then what the fuck? Why are they holding up guns? Like, how are they a threat to you at that point? It's faked on purpose. They already disproved one of the videos where the IDF had to do a second take. Yeah, I saw that one where there were more. They pumped this like last week, and then they rescinded it very quickly, where they were talking about how like there was one guy in this massive group that they had like apprehended, had a bunch of weapons that he like put for, I think like 2 weapons that they put forward or some shit like that. No, this one also 2 takes for this exact photo you were looking at. Again, it's evidence of mass surrenders. They keep going on about how Hamas is falling apart. And then anytime this shit happens and they're like, oh yeah, we found a bunch of people that mass surrendered, it comes out that their family members are like, dude, that's a UN guy. Like, that's a UN worker. That's a college professor. That's a UNRWA teacher. That's a doctor. What are you talking about?
Facilities and all the major roads leading to it. Now, there are people who took it as a refuge, a shelter, running away.
If their numbers were correct and they had killed 8,000 Palestinian militants, for example, or if they were apprehending Palestinian militants in the hundreds every day as they are surrendering, as the way Israel is claiming it, then how the fuck do you lose 10 commanders in one fight? Do you understand? Like, it doesn't make sense to the population. It doesn't make sense to the Israeli population. You look at the situation, you go, okay, well, I thought we were doing gangbusters out here, but I'm seeing reports on Yediot that there are 5,000 wounded soldiers that are being treated in a hospital right now. I'm hearing reports of like my family members like that are in the IDF getting killed. What the how is this happening?
From the airstrike, relentless bombardment in their neighborhoods. Now, we're talking about hundreds of people inside the hospital, including the medical team and those who were brought as injuries, and the patients in the hospital, and 100 other of evacuees inside the hospital. The disturbing reports, what we got from Camel Adwan Hospital, that the Israeli military on loudspeakers ordering the administration of the hospital to hand in all the guns that the security personnel at the hospital carry in order to protect the hospital. They were collected by the Israeli military. Now, anyone above the age of 15 was also ordered to start evacuating the hospital with their hands above their head. The Israeli military started to blindfold those men inside the hospital, round them up inside the court of the hospital. So far, the situations are very, very difficult for people inside. Just to give a broader picture of what happened over the past few weeks, the hospital came under.
From my experience with my Israeli grandparents, I honestly think the deaths are seen as justified, and just the cost of doing what needs to be done in Gaza. You seem to be under the assumption that this is like before, and the Israeli public really cares about the dead soldiers. Nah, I just know it doesn't matter how racist the population is. I know that casualties of this sort turn any war into a race against the clock. That's what I know. I know no matter how racist motherfuckers can be, people will sour very quickly, especially when they're used to a certain level of comfort and security that they have had. Obviously, there's still going to be people that are like, nah, it's great, it's fine, I don't give a shit. But ultimately, there's a cost associated with an ongoing war. There's an economic cost. There's definitely an economic cost, but that puts a clock right on top of this military occupation, this military operation.
Heavy airstrikes and tank shells were almost 100 people killed inside the courtyard of the hospital, and the hospital resorted to digging massive graveyard just to bury them because they could not take them outside the hospital. This is not the first time hospitals are becoming under heavy attacks, but it looks like it's a war not only on evacuation shelters, but also including hospital. We've seen a Shifa hospital, the Indonesian hospital as well within the past a few weeks. It's also important to point out only 9 out of the 40 hospitals across the Gaza Strip are remaining and operating at the low capacity possible.
I do think the psyche and sensitivity to casualties really changed post-October 7. Also, in most of the large wars, Israel suffered hundreds or even thousands of soldiers killed, such as 2006, 1982, 1973, 1967, etc. Now they suffered 116 killed so far in comparison. 116 in 2 months, though. And remember, 116 killed in 2 months, but also 116 killed when Israel, for a very long time now, has developed the confidence that, like, oh yeah, we can keep this shit going. When your perspective changes over the course of the many years that you have maintained this occupation, I think that there's a level of comfort that you are used to that makes it much easier for your will to be broken. And that's why I bring up the wounded numbers too, because there's like 116 have died, but there's also a shit ton of wounded soldiers as well.
In the central part and the southern part of the Gaza Strip.
And Hani,
for reference, Israel is losing soldiers at about 10 times the rate that the U.S. did in Afghanistan. If the war continued for 20 years like Afghanistan, it wouldn't continue for 20 years. The same death rate with Israel would lose 23,000 to the U.S. is 2,400 in Afghanistan. I think there's also a difference between like hiding the truth in a much larger country that is conducting operations overseas, hiding the truth about casualties and the toll it's taken when it's happening directly in your backyard within shooting distance, within an arm's reach. If America was engaging in counterinsurgency warfare in Mexico, that would be a very different calculation. And how many deaths that the public considers to be permissible would be very different than like sending soldiers overseas in a massive country like ours and then them coming back. I believe, as far as IDF death goes, I believe approximately 10% of them have been friendly fire incidents as well. That's true, but if you look at the occupation of southern Lebanon from 1982 to 2000, they didn't pull out for 18 years and after suffering hundreds of killed and thousands wounded. And that was also against non-state actors such as the PLO and then Hezbollah. True. We'll see. I feel like you're also talking about Israel that was running off the, as far as like the international attitude goes, you're also talking about Israel running off the dubs that they took in like the 6-Day War, for example. And the attitude was genuinely different towards Israel back then. The international attitude towards Israel was definitely different in the Western world, specifically back then as it is now. We're talking like post-failure of the war on terror. We're talking about an Israeli military that is significantly worse. And also, what you're referencing is like 1982 to 2000, they're doing the Dahiyya Doctrine, whereas they're doing it now to Palestinians, but there are also Israeli civilians that are still captive inside of Gaza too. Oh, it's not 10%, it's 20% friendly fire? Okay. I think the hostage component, like the Israeli hostages still being in Gaza, is a big component because Israel does not give a shit in general about the unpopularity of Netanyahu plays a big role. Israel still not being able to get the hostages out plays a big role. There is a shit ton of dissatisfaction that will mount. The IDF is a profoundly popular military, obviously, like from the Israeli perspective, and yet the more things like this happen, the more it will shake away the confidence that people have with the IDF. We'll see. And then you have, obviously, Wael Dahdu, the Al Jazeera senior veteran correspondent that is in hospital right now. He got shot. His cameraman got killed. Or no, I guess he was injured in an airstrike. I thought he was shot at. Or this is the same one, right? Didn't his cameraman get killed in this attack? Remember, while his entire family was executed with an airstrike that he reported on. Al Jazeera's statement on the killing of Samir Abu Dakka. Al Jazeera urges the international community, media freedom organizations, and the ICC to take immediate action to hold the Israeli government and military accountable for these acts of carnage and crimes against humanity. Al Jazeera Media Network condemns in the strongest terms the Israeli drone attack on a Gaza school that resulted in the killing of cameraman Samir Abu Dakka. The network holds Israel accountable for systematically targeting and killing Al Jazeera journalists and their families. In today's bombing in Han Yunis, Israeli drones fired missiles at a school where civilians sought refuge, resulting in indiscriminate casualties. Following Samer's injury, he was left to bleed to death for over 5 hours as the Israeli forces prevented ambulances and rescue workers from reaching him, denying the much-needed emergency treatment. Al Jazeera Media Network extends its sincere condolences to the family in Gaza and in Belgium, to the late colleague Samer Abu Dakka. With the killing of Samer Abu Dakka, the number of journalists and media workers killed in Gaza reached over 90. 90. Al Jazeera urges the international community, media freedom organizations, and the International Criminal Court to take immediate action to hold the Israeli government and military accountable for these acts of carnage and crimes against humanity. Now, it's not just in Gaza where this is happening. It's happening in the West Bank as well, in broad daylight. Here, Israeli forces severely assault Palestinian journalists live on CNN Turk. Shoot me, the journalist screams. They go on to punch, strangle, and throw him on the floor and kick him.
Olası bir hareketlenmeye karşı da görmüş olduğunuz gibi yolun giriş ve çıkışlarını tutmuş durumda ve hiçbir şekilde basının fotoğraf çekmesine, video görüntüsü almasına.
They're saying they're not allowing the press to actually take photos and to film. Here's the press release, the latest updates. Government Information Office in Gaza says 89 journalists were martyred in the Gaza Strip as a result of the ongoing Israeli aggression since October 7th. 89. And they're doing the same shit, not only in the Gaza Strip, but in the West Bank as well. This is footage from the West Bank. This is footage from Jerusalem. Specifically, it says Kudüs.
Halil şu müdahaleye bakar mısın ya?
The commentator's like, look at the way they're behaving.
Aslında çok şaşıracak bir şey yok. Tam da İsrail polisine uygun müdahaleler bunlar.
The commentator says, actually, it's not very surprising. This is precisely how the Israeli forces operate. This is precisely how they operate.
Ve bunlar meslektaşlarımız bu arada. Her hafta beraberiz.
He says these guys are our co-workers. We see them every weekend. We're together every
gibi
weekend.
yine o sert müdahalelerden biri başladı ve bu müdahaleyi basına yapıyorlar. Şunu da ifade edelim.
And they're doing this to the press. They're behaving like this
Bu
towards the
arada Arap
press.
basını. Onlar Kudüs'te gazetecilik yapan meslektaşlarımız.
These are our co-workers that are in the press in Jerusalem.
Yine bir fiziki müdahale var. Bağırmaması konusunda uyarıyor ve
More physical apprehensions. They're yelling at him to not. They're yelling at him to not yell.
meslektaşımızın boğazını sıkmış durumda. Sadece aşağıya geçmek istediler ve bir yumruk daha attı. İkinci yumruk.
They're hitting him in the head and they're choking
Görmüş olduğunuz
him.
gibi İsrail polisinin şiddeti, dehşeti.
Saying you can see the Israeli police and their inhumanity, their violence.
Devam ediyor. Böyleler.
This is how they treat people.
Hiçbir şey ayırt etmiyorlar ve şu an tetiği çekti.
Look, he literally fucking
Silahın ucuyla vurdu.
he hits him with the gun.
Evet. Müdahaleler tam olarak böyle oluyor değerli izleyenler. Bakın silahın tetiğini çekti.
He
Vur
goes,
beni dedi.
"Come on,
Arkasını
shoot
döndü.
me." He says,
Gazeteci
"Come on, shoot me."
boğazını sıktı ve yere yatırdı.
And then he chokes him and slams him to the ground,
Görmüş
starts kicking
olduğunuz
him in
gibi
the
çok
head.
sert müdahaleler
That's a journalist, dog. That's what they're doing to journalists in Jerusalem, dog. Think about that. Most moral army, my ass. Suck my dick.
var. Çok sert müdahaleler var. Çok sert müdahaleler var.
They're just beating the shit out of him.
İşte gazeteci, Müslüman, sivil ayırt etmeksizin buna benzer silahın ucuyla
Now
çok
they're
sert
going to the
vurdu.
cameraman.
Halil geri çek. Halil geri gel. Halil geri gel.
He's telling the cameraman to Halil is his name. Pull back, pull back, pull back.
Gel Halil. Okay. Okay, calm down. Okay. Okay. Okay. Okay. Şu an silahın tetiğini bile bize doğrultmaya
He's trying to tell him like, okay.
başladı. Şu an sağlıkçılar geldi. Ne yazık ki çok üzülerek söylüyorum ki bir meslektaşımız çok ciddi bir şekilde yaralandı.
Yeah, he's like almost in tears talking about how like the medics are on scene. One of our colleagues have been severely injured. Did you learn Hebrew? No, man. They're speaking in Turkish. These are Turkish journalists. This is Turkish press. They're from CNN. This is CNN Turk. Isn't this a war crime because the journalists are protected? Brother, what are you saying? The Israeli army does not do anything that isn't a war crime. They only do war crimes. If they don't do a war crime, it's probably by accident. Sometimes they accidentally do something good and then they're like, boys, we fucked up. We were supposed to do a war crime. And now we accidentally did not do a war crime. Let's do it. Let's do more war crimes to fucking make up for it. Is there a difference in IOF and IDF? No. People call, myself included, we call the Israeli Defense Force, which is their official name, the Israeli Occupying Force, which is what they actually do. If you hear someone call it the IOF, myself included, know that you are probably talking to someone who is correcting the record. The Geneva Conventions is a to-do list for the Israeli Occupation Force. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I showed you this day one. Like, we looked at the international with the international standards of like what it means to do genocide, right? According to the Geneva Conventions, like, and it's a laundry list. Anyway, everybody wants me to watch this guy, Greg Stoker, U.S. war veteran, explains why the IOF is losing so many officers and so little to no soldiers. So I'm gonna watch it. I usually don't like atrocities videos like this, but sure, I'll watch it finally because everyone is losing their goddamn minds over it.
He's continued to mount in the Strip. The IDF just released the names and ranks of casualties from today, and it is wild. There's a lieutenant colonel, 3 majors, a captain, 2 non-commissioned officers, and then a pretty high-ranking non-commissioned officer. And you might be like, wait, where are all the privates and the corporals and the lower enlisted? Well, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to unpack this whole thing. But this is Stalingrad, dude. This is Stalingrad. This is a battle everybody studies because it was a huge blunder for the German army. They invade Russia, and they bomb and shell Stalingrad into rubble. Sounds familiar. And one of the biggest advantages the German had were their tanks and their armored vehicles, which, because of the rubble, couldn't really maneuver the way they should have. And they really nerfed themselves against the Russians because the Russians knew their own rubble of their own city better than they ever would. So they had like ambush positions, fixed fighting positions, and scary sniper positions. And that is actually one of the defining aspects of the battle because these Russian snipers would just target the officers and leave the lower enlisted men alone. And, you know, it would break morale as their officers kept having to get replaced over and over.
Yeah, except like the Israeli military, 1, has rank inflation, 2, increases the ranks post-mortem, and 3, I don't know if they're doing that. I don't know if they're like specifically using snipers to target some of the higher ranking officers to like hit the Israeli morale.
Over and over again. The only time you see casualty profiles just like this is with snipers. Lieutenant Colonel, Golani Brigade's 13th Battalion. Major, Golani Brigade's 13th Battalion. Major, Golani Brigade's 51st Battalion. So on. This usually speaks to military incompetence because the officers have to go to the front lines and expose themselves in order to deal with a certain type of situation that no one else can figure out. When we're talking about military incompetence, I want you to look at the ages of these people. Lieutenant Colonel, 35 years old. One of my best friends was a West Point artillery officer. He didn't even make major until that. We have 2 majors who are 23 years old. What? That's insane. We have a 19-year-old sergeant. I was still in basic training when I was 19. I didn't even make sergeant.
Yeah, it's because it's rank inflation. This officer inflation is biting them in the ass on the PR front. Makes it seem like Hamas is able to get their most experienced and seasoned fighters. They already have like massive rank inflation. It might actually, I don't know, make the Israelis feel like the deaths are more devastating or whatever. But ultimately, it's just, I don't think these are experienced guys that are getting murked is what I mean. With the exception of the 35-year-old. They have both rank inflation and they have post-mortem boosts too.
And the Rangers until I was like 22. They're just a bunch of kids with no training. I mean, this makes a lot more sense. Well, there you have it, folks. You're not defeating Hamas with that when nobody in the military has the maturity or the practical experience for the positions they're supposed to be occupying. That's why no progress is being made, but the only thing they can do is listen to their gospel AI targeting program and drop the bombs where it tells them to drop the bombs. Seriously, just a bunch of thugs with a bunch of weapons and advanced gear that they don't deserve and that are too good for them. Oh yeah, and here's a picture of soldiers from that Golan Defense Brigade.
The Golani soldiers, by the way, are like this is supposed to be an elite force, right? They ripped this force.
It's been getting sniped so hard. This is them inside the Hamas parliament, you know, just taking victory pictures for the fans back home. Man, you guys are really asking for it. freaking 23-year-old majors. Like, what is this, the 19th century British colonial army where you can just purchase commissions if you're wealthy enough?
I said this before, the way Israeli media covered it was that it was reported at the time that an IDF soldier may have been kidnapped in the combat zone, so high-ranking soldiers which were in the area jumped to try and save him as fast as possible, only to walk into some sort of trap. Yeah, I heard that it was like 2 waves, right? 2 waves of explosions. Isn't that how that works? Something like that. OPSEC, who needs it? No, this is not OPSEC. The reason why they're posting those photos is because that is to galvanize the audience at home. Yeah, again, the issue is they entered houses with IEDs and it was blown up. Then the rescue team got it. I think an army would have an issue with buildings wired to blow. I think any army would have an issue with buildings wired to blow, etc. I do think that the Israeli occupying force is not as well trained as other militaries because the most seasoned, the most experienced motherfuckers literally have experience taking pot shots at children as a police force. You are withering away your military when their experience basically comes from being a fucking cop. If you took the New York Police Department and put them in a war zone where people are actually shooting back at them, their target hit rate in active shooting situations is 17%. The NYPD is supposed to be a standing army, larger than some of the militaries of other countries. They have a submarine, multiple submarines. NYPD active shooting target hit rate is 17%. 17%! You put them in front of motherfuckers wearing sandals who have nothing to lose, and all they want to do is purge you from their fucking country in an environment that they are not familiar with, they're going to get their shit pushed in. And the IDF knows this, which is precisely the reason why they don't actually engage in a lot of like combat such as this one. They literally level entire areas, and then they bring in the armor, and then at the very last moment, they have actual infantry out and about. And even then, that infantry is still susceptible to IEDs and shit like that. Units like Golani and Gavati are constantly training for this, as do armored cops. That's why tanks are never seen in the West Bank, because most of these units don't deploy there. It's a lot of other infantry units, and especially border police that do West Bank stuff. Ultimately, out of all of the brigades that they have, yes, you're going to have more experienced, troops. I mean, they have 300,000 reservists, like 300,000 reservists that are not even doing internal security at that point. They trained as internal security. They trained as police, basically. They cycled, and then they cycled out, and they went in to do their regular work. They became normal civilians. They have jobs. They're used to eating a warm meal. They're not 19-year-old psychopaths hopped up on go juice, sent into Afghanistan, ready to kill. Even those guys who are inexperienced overall, at least have like less of a life to live beyond just like murdering people. If you're 23 years old and you've been out of service for like 2-3 years, you have a wife and children, you're used to eating falafel on Fridays, and you have an advertising job, and now you're going back into Gaza, you're going to be like, this sucks. I don't want to do this. I have a comfortable life. I think that's one of the major differences within like what Israel is doing and what Israel is, Israeli forces that they're sending out versus like the American military in Afghanistan. And even the American military would have a hard time in Gaza as well. Aren't conscripts getting dysentery because they refuse to eat MREs? Yeah. Well, they don't have like adequate refrigeration for the food that like civilians are sending to the front lines, and they don't have clean water either, so they keep getting sick. And the Gazan water is not, you can't drink the Gazan water, it'll kill you. Did Noah Smith yet again reinvent BDS? If Israel rejects a two-state solution, we should just withdraw our support, let them fend for themselves. We should never support conquerors. Dude, Noah Smith popping off on the timeline, reinventing boycott, divestments, and sanctions on Israel twice in the last 2 months. What a phenomenal moment, dude. That's twice now. He invented BDS like a month ago when he read one article from Chodemer on The New Yorker about how nutty the settlers were, and was like, what the any person that has an opinion such as this one doesn't deserve a single dollar from me. And I was like, that's great. Congratulations for, coming to terms with something that like a lot of pro-Palestinian activists have known for many, many years. Noah Smith going to reverse engineer Marxism and you're out of a job? Yeah, I know. I do love this. I mean, I celebrate that he is like coming to this conclusion, but it is pretty funny to me where it's like, no, man, we knew about this already. Like you're figuring this shit out right now. This has some real, like, just finding out about Israel being kind of racist. He's like, just finding out about this Israel stuff seems kind of racist. These guys, I don't know. We all take our own path, be nice. I just don't think he's being that genuine overall. I think he's just like, he is already geared towards like hating the left and owning the left. A lot of people do not have any sort of like serious way of analyzing these kinds of things from a moral framework that makes them go, oh, this is unacceptable. I don't care. We have to stop this right now. They usually look at it from their own incredibly personal framework of like, are the people who I hate the most supporting this position? Are the people who are against this position being really annoying? That's usually how like a lot of Americans treat this shit. Like plenty of other internet commentators that you probably have seen or watched, most of their framework is completely guided by who annoys them or who they hate, and not like a real moral consideration for the death toll, for the casualties. And then a lot of them will simultaneously project and say, I do that, when it's like, no, I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck what your background is. In the beginning of this entire thing, there were a lot of people who were like shitting on Vaush, for example, in my community. And I said, no, Vaush historically has been pro-Palestinian, maybe even to a degree that is like goes above and beyond, literally got banned from Twitch for saying certain things back in the day. But like, he has raised money for the PCRF. Like, he has been very consistently on the right side of this issue. And I admit that. I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit about like petty grievances of other sorts when it comes down to someone being on the right side.